Today we're going to make a tumor growth in a field of cells.
It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor.
Yes, it is. We'll be using MoGraph and an emitter and some simple lighting materials. Please check out the description for the project files and the other links that are available in there as well. And let's get to it. So we'll start off with a landscape object. I'm going to go ahead and make it 1200 by 1200. And let's look at our polygons. So I had an NB on my keyboard. And I'm going to turn off the sea level here. So borders at sea level, turn that off. Let's turn it down to like 50 in the Y. So it's not too bumpy, but we're getting some nice texture. And for seed, I'm just going to put the year in so we get something a little bit different. Let's go ahead and bend this. So I want to make kind of a stage for us to be able to set a scene here. So we're going to put a bend modifier, fit to parent. I'm going to say X minus. And let's make it a little bit shorter. Push it back. And go ahead and pull it up in the air. And then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one and rotate it around a little bit. Just 90 degrees. It just gives us this kind of like bowl a little bit that we can work in. And so we'll be in here. And I want to be able to have a nice turn like this. And having those curves in there is going to give us a nice stage to be able to do that. And so I'm going to actually take this whole thing and just rotate it so that we're staying on our XYZ axis, right? So I'm going to rotate this whole thing around until it's the corners facing me. So 145 degrees or so. So this is our main stage. And now I need to make some cells for the background. So I'm going to start with a cube. And I'm going to put that cube immediately in a subdivision surface. And I'm going to give it one subdivision in the Y, or give it one segment in the Y. Let's take this whole thing up a little higher so that we can see it. It's obviously enormous. I'm just going to scale it down so it's about the same size or maybe close to one of these cell shapes. And let's go ahead and make a cloner. So the cloner is going to populate our cell across the surface here on our landscape object. And so I'll make a cloner object. It's going to be an object cloner. And I'll set the object cloner to be multi-instance, and it is going to clone to our landscape object. And I'm going to set the distribution to be polygon center. What am I cloning? I'm going to clone this subdivision surface cell that we just created. And I can zoom in a little bit here so I can see these. And now I will just scale down that cube a little bit until it's sort of filling up the space the way I want it to. And I want to just rotate these in the Y. So let's go into our cloner, or I'm sorry, in the pitch. So let's say minus 90 here so that they're facing up. And that's looking pretty cool. So I'm going to hit NA so I don't see those polygons anymore. So we've got this nice filled in field of cells that's working really well. But I want to give it a little bit more variation. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here and add some effectors. I'm going to say MoGraph. We're going to add a random effector. And in the parameter setting, we're just going to zero out all of this information here and just nudge it over a couple spots, maybe 2, and maybe none in the Y and a couple in the Z, just so we see a little bit of variation in here. And let's go ahead and do some scale as well, but we're just going to do slight, very slight scale. I don't want these to be a lot different, right? Because most cells are pretty alike. In healthy tissue, right, the cells are pretty much the same size, relatively the same size. And so we want to just go ahead and maybe move these a little bit more in the Y. I just want it to not feel like it's on a perfect grid. I'm also going to add in a push apart effector. And it's just going to push apart a very little bit. I'm going to go ahead and do, let's see how big this cube is. It's 15, right? So push apart, we're going to do like, let's just do the 15. So that's making a whole bunch of marshmallows that are not close enough together. So let's turn it all the way down and just nudge it up a little bit. I'm just trying to minimize the amount of overlap that's happening a tiny bit in there. And I think that's pretty good. All right, so we've got this nice field of cells. And now let's go ahead and work on our tumor cells. Actually, I think I'm going to just pump up the height on this a little bit more. I want some more variation. So this is the nice thing about using these parametric objects, right? So I can always come in here and add a little bit more detail into my object. And so I have these areas in here where I can sort of decide where I want my tumor growth to happen. And I think I want it to happen maybe right here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is create an emitter. And I'm going to place that, so that's under simulate emitter. And I'm going to place that emitter exactly where I want this first cell to start growing. Right, so it comes in kind of big. I don't want it to be that big. I want to look at the emitter tab, and I'm just going to make it 1 by 1, maybe 10 by 10. And let's go ahead and have that emitter. So we want to look at the z dimension of the emitter and have that face upwards. Right, so if I just select my emitter and hit rotate it up 90 degrees. Now our emitter is facing up. And what I want to do is bring this emitter down so that it is kind of in between one of these cells here. So it's a little tricky to do, but just spend a little time. So the choices we make here are going to decide exactly where these cells are growing, right? So I'm thinking somewhere around here feels pretty nice. And I want to find an area that's got a little bit of an opening. And I do think I want to make this emitter a little smaller. Let's just make it 2 by 2. And let's just nestle it down inside this little gap so that we don't really see it. Because what's going to happen is our cells are now going to grow out of this area. And they're going to fill in to create our tumor growth. So perfect. We've got our emitter set up. Right now, if we play, it's just kind of shooting a bunch of particles straight up in the air. If I turn off our landscape object, you'll see it's just shooting a bunch of particles straight up in the air. Obviously, that's not what we want, right? What I want to actually do is duplicate this cell, control drag it as a child of my emitter. I'm going to tell my particle to be showing objects. And so now it's actually shooting a whole bunch of my cells up in the air. So that's great. That's getting somewhere. I also want to have these cells start small and then get bigger as they grow. I mean, I know in reality when a tumor is growing, it's actually all the cells are multiplying at a really rapid rate, right? Cellular division is happening at a rapid rate. But we're going to kind of fake that appearance by having cells grow inside the ball and slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger as they grow up. And so for me to do that, I need to scale up my cube. And so I want to just give it some growth time. And let's give us some more time on our timeline as well. So we're going to do 450 frames. So that's a 15-second animation at 30 frames per second. And let's have our cells grow over about 120 frames or so. And so I'm going to say at frame 120, I'm going to keyframe the size. Let's just go ahead and make them 15. 15, 15, 15. And then at frame 0, I'm going to have them be 0. So now our cell is growing. And you can see what's nice about the emitter is that actually makes the cells grow as they're emitted, right? So it's growing, that animation takes place from start to finish as it's emitted. So that's really nice. That's going to give us what we need. So let's make some modifications to our emitter. We want to have this emitter last our timeline at least. So lifetime is 600, that's great. We don't want it to stop emission until the end, so I'm going to say 450 there. I don't want them to be moving at all, so I'm going to say speed 0. All right, so now we're just going to be emitting one after the other, and it's not going to be moving anywhere. So it's just making one after the other, right on top of each other. Okay, so that's getting us pretty close. The rest of the time, we're going to use our dynamic system in Cinema 4D to have this tumor growth feel believable. One of the telltale signs of cancer is the cells are dysplastic, so they come in, meaning they're basically all different sizes, right? So they come in at variable sizes usually, versus healthy tissue, like on your skin surface, right? Most of the skin cells are relatively the same size. Most of the cells that lie on the inside of your um, mucous membranes are the same size. But cancer cells, as they're growing, have a lot of variability in the size. And so we want to make sure that our cancer cells that we're creating here, our tumor cells, are of different sizes. And to do that, I'm actually just going to duplicate this a few times. Like I think 4 is fine. And what I'll do is come out here to this 120 section. And each one of these I will change the size a little bit. So let's have the ones from top to bottom be largest to the smallest, right? So I'll make one that's a little smaller, maybe 12. So I'm just keyframing each one there. I'll leave this one to be 15. I'll make this one like 17. And I'll make this one like 20. So now we have 4 different cell sizes growing at the same speed, but to different sizes from 0 to variable sizes. So the first thing I want to do is tell my cloner to have all of the cells that it's created be a collision object, right? So I'm going to go to tags, bullet tags, collider body. And under collision, I want to make sure there's no bounce and I want to make sure there's no noise. So it's just got friction, right? And then under my emitter, I'm going to select each one of these subdivision surfaces because those will have more polygons, right? Tags, bullet tags, rigid body. And I want to tell it to have a bounce of 0 and friction of 100 and collision of 0, collision noise of 0. Now, if I play right now, they're probably going to do things like blow up or not look very pretty. And in fact, I don't see it doing anything. And the reason is it's actually making them, but it's just dropping them out the bottom. It's basically pooping little cells out the bottom right now. And that's because it's not following the position, right? The gravity's turned on. What I want it to do is actually follow position. So I'm going to come out here to each one of these rigid body tags, and I'm going to go to force. And I'm going to tell it to follow the position, and I'm just going to say 5 in each one of these areas. I'm going to give it a little bit of damping too, so I'm going to say 50 in each of these. And once I've done that, what's going to happen is each time it makes a new cell, it's going to try to stay where it is. So they're all going to be fighting each other constantly to stay where they are. So now we're getting this effect where the cells are sort of growing out of this bottom. So we've got these little marshmallow-y cell kind of things growing out of the bottom here. And they're sort of just filling in the area because we've got that animation, right? We've got that animated growth over time. And so this is going to give us this nice effect where the cells are trying to fill in this area, and they're just going to continue doing that. So all we have to do right now is really play around with the emitter speed to decide how many we're going to make. So I'm just going to pump this up to 20 in each of these. I usually do the same in both of these. Otherwise, you don't see in your viewport what you're actually going to get when you render, and that's a little confusing. I turn this up to 20. Let's see what we get. So the cells are being produced and they're growing. They're coming out of this little spot. So I think that feels pretty believable. And now they're growing pretty quickly. And I just really want to play through this once and see how they um, sort of work with each other. Like I want them to stay in this mass. I want it to feel like a sort of a tumor growth mass where it's constantly building new cells and sort of displacing each other. And the cells are variable sizes, so that's great. I think it's working really well. From here, I'm just going to go ahead and set up my camera motion, and then we'll do some quick materials and lighting, and we'll be done. So let's go back. I just want to start off with a couple cells here so I can see, and I'll change my camera in a little bit. So let's go ahead and create a camera, standard camera. We'll look through that camera. And I'm going to create a null object, and this is going to be our camera control. And I'm going to put the camera in that null object. Let's go ahead and bring this null object up in 3D space. So where does it live right now? It's down here. Actually, I'm going to take the camera out for a moment. I'm going to bring the null object up. I'm going to center this null object right over the top of my cells. It's pretty close. That's close enough, actually. And then I'm going to put my camera inside that control object and look through it. So the reason I did that is I can now take my camera and I can be like really close to this, right? So I can be, let's say, right here. So I'm just framing this shot and making sure I'm not seeing anything in the background that's getting cut off, right? So nice sort of staging. Uh, pretty happy. So I'm going to go ahead and I keyframe both of these things right now. I'm going to keyframe the camera and I'm going to keyframe my control object. Then I'm going to go ahead and play this down a little bit longer and let it grow to the size that it's going to get to. I'll use the magic of television here to speed it up for you. All right, so I've played this all the way to the end, and incidentally, I've turned on my camera. So it defaults to cycle, so I just turned it on simple so that it would stop at the end instead of ping-ponging or instead of looping. So I'm just going to grab my camera, reframe this a little bit, pull it back, kind of move more towards the center. That'll be my camera keyframe, but I'm also going to rotate my camera controller on the heading just so I'm getting a little bit of interest around this. I don't want to rotate too crazy much, but I think it just feels nice to sort of come around it a little bit so we get a little bit of interesting view. And so you're not going to be able to see the, what I'm going to do this actually, I'm going to create a sphere here and just scale it up. This is kind of a nice way to get a shot framed without having to have the actual object there. So I'll just turn the emitter off a little bit and we'll see now. So we're starting off with the center of this and then our shot's moving over as we go by and framing the entire thing, right? So just pretty simple. One last thing I like to do with my camera, and this is something I see all the time in animations. If you ever watch like a title sequence or something like that, you don't see a lot of like easing in and easing out on a camera motion, right? You see this nice straight linear path through. Well, Cinema 4D defaults to easing in and easing out on everything pretty much. So you have to sort of do this on your own. And what I want to do is pop up my dope sheet here really quickly. I'm going to select my camera controller and I'm going to just change the keyframes on here to linear instead of Bezier, and I'll do the same thing with the camera itself. And now when we look at this, it's a steady motion from start to finish, right? So from start to finish, we've got this really steady motion. I'm also kind of going to come back in here and I'm going to move these initial keyframes for my camera to 0. So we've got from 0 to 450 with that nice sort of camera rotation. Now I can get rid of the sphere, turn our emitter back on, and we can play through and get a better feeling now for what this shot's actually going to look like, right? So we've got the cancer growth coming out or the tumor growth coming out of this area, and the camera's got this nice, the camera has this nice motion coming around this shot as it's happening. All right, let's go ahead and set up some pretty simple lighting and we'll get this rendering. So we'll save this. I'm going to go ahead and create a dome light for me. And in that, I'm going to use uh, this studio light, so you can scale these up and look at them. I like this one. It gives us this like nice overhead sort of even lighting. So I feel like it's good just for creating that sort of overcast sort of feel. And so I'm going to drag that into the object section of my dome light. And let's go ahead and turn on the IPR so we can see what we're getting. Now, this is a weird issue that I've been having with Redshift. For some reason, it's trying to, I don't know, because this is being animated from the emitter, it just is having a really hard time. So I'm just going to go back to the beginning here a little bit and play for a small amount until I get a couple of these cells in my scene. And hopefully it doesn't freak out quite so much. Okay, so that's what the dome light is giving us. I'm actually going to turn that down by about half. And then I'm going to put a spotlight in here. And let's go ahead and grab that spotlight. So let's turn off the IPR. Let's make a new spotlight. I'll tell my uh, viewport to use the selected object as the camera. And I'm just going to scroll out here until I find my scene. And my camera's over here. I kind of want the spotlight to come down at sort of an angle like this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And then I will look through the camera and we'll change some of those settings to match. Turn our IPR back on again. And so it's casting this nice shadow on here, and I'm getting this sort of top left lighting that I'm liking pretty well. I just like that it sort of fills in this front region. So let's go ahead and put some materials on there. We might have to make some adjustments to that light. Actually, before I put anything else on there, I am going to change the color just slightly. I like to make it just a little bit yellowy, orangey. And let's make some materials. So we'll create a standard material. This will be our healthy. And let's just give it a sort of a pinky, warm, beigey sort of healthy look. I'm going to turn up some fuzziness or roughness on the, sorry, that was supposed to be 1. I'm going to turn up the roughness on the reflection, and we'll put this on our cloner. So that's going to give us our healthy tissue. I'm also going to put it on that landscape object so that we have the underlying areas also filled in. And then let's duplicate this for our tumor and just give it a really sort of more ugly, less healthy looking color. And we'll throw this on our emitter. And I think on both of these, I'm going to add just a tiny bit of transmission. So we'll do like 0.3. Maybe I'll just do it to the tumor. Kind of want this color to be a little bit brighter. Now I think I need to pump up my spotlight a little bit. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can bring it in closer, which is what I'm going to do. Or you can, change the size of it. So maybe I'll try that first. I'm just going to select it and use my T and drag to the right, right? So it's making the size bigger, and that's actually going to brighten the intensity of it for me. So nice control for that. Now, if I wanted to make this really beautiful, I think I would add some subsurface scattering. I do think I'm going to pull this spotlight around to the front a little bit more. So let's say let's say camera, use selected object, and let's just rotate this around a little. Maybe pull it this way a little bit. Look through the camera again. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm digging that. Okay. Last but not least, let's go ahead and set up some depth of field. I'm going to put a null object in here. Actually, I'm just going to use my emitter as my camera focal point. And under my camera, I'm going to say optical, drag my emitter in here, turn on bokeh, and make this at like 1, just so we have a little bit of softness. And let's go ahead and set up our render settings. Under Redshift, I like to try to make this render as quickly as I can. So I'm going to turn bucket mode on here, and you can see right away it's going really slow, right? But if I go ahead and put this on advanced, let's put this at 0.6 on our threshold, and let's turn on denoising. Right, so that's going to speed it up really quickly. So the lower this number is in the threshold, the longer it's going to take to render and the more clarity it's going to have and sharpness. So if you're trying to speed your renders up, I usually try like 0.6 or so and then enable denoising. And that sort of smooths everything out and gives me this nice look. So it just takes a little bit of play time with each one to see how it's going to work for you. And usually under global illumination, I just put them both on brute force. And I like to turn off this random noise pattern. And that's about it. So our render's all set up to go. Or we've got some pretty simple lighting here. I'll render this out and show you what it looks like. So here's what we've got. We've got a nice simple tumor growth. You could easily now start bringing in vascularization and things like that if you wanted to have a completed finished animation. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you've liked this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in another video.